everyone, it's Kat and I am back today. I'm so excited to film. This has been, I've been waiting for today. I am doing a video about the new Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. This I've been very excited about. I don't really need to talk too much about it because it's been all over the internet. There's reviews coming out the wazoo. I have not watched one of them because I want to know my opinions on this. But this is the newest 15 pan midi palette from Natasha Denona. It's called I Need a Nude. It's inspired by the I Need a Nude lipstick range, or at least sort of like an extension of that. I'm hoping it's permanent because if this is great, I want to be able to repurchase. When am I going to repurchase the palette? Let's be real. Anyway, today I'm going to do swatches. I'm going to compare this. I've had a few requests to compare it to the ABH Sultry Palette. There's a couple of shades that I sort of want to compare to the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural and also the new Kaleidos, one of the quads. So I'm going to be doing some comparison swatches. I'm going to be applying this on my face, and I'm also going to check back throughout the next week or so and give you multiple looks. Let's see how much versatility we can get in this. Let's see if I can wear it to a wedding, and let's just see how all the shades perform and what I think about them. So that's what I'm going to do. It's going to be fairly comprehensive. A storm is coming, so we need to hurry up. But if you haven't seen this palette, I think you're the only person on the internet that hasn't, but this is it. So like I said, it's the newest midi 15 pan palette. In Australia, it's $114. The prices are creeping up. I think the Yucca palette was $111, and then before that it was like $104. So the prices are starting to go up. I want to see if this is worth the money. To me personally, I was very excited to see this simply because I own quite a lot of Natasha Denona palettes. I like the quality. Historically, the Natasha Denona shadows have worked really well on me. But besides the sort of mini palettes, the small 5 pan palettes, I haven't actually found a nude color story that I really want to buy. A lot of them were quite warm. I bought the bronze one that was really, really orange. So when I saw this cooler tone one with a lot of taupes and a lot of sort of slightly grey tones, cooler tone bronzes, some peachy shades, I thought this is sort of like my everyday jam. I'm so excited to try it. And there are some new sort of glittery formulas in here as well that haven't really been in past palettes. So I love an everyday sparkle. I love sort of just chuck a glitter on your eye, make it look like you're more awake and enjoy your day. So this palette really, really interested me. A few things about the packaging. The box, it's grey, it's boring. On the other side, we see all the ingredients for the shadows. And it also says there's matte shadows, there's metallic sparkling duochrome and chroma crystal eyeshadows. They're saying for the sparkly formulas to apply with a dense eyeshadow brush for a subtle finish, or for high foiled payoff, apply it with a damp eyeshadow brush or with the tip of your fingers. With the palette itself, it's plastic, it's quite sleek, it's fairly heavy, and it's got one of those hinges that you can just open at any point and it will stay open, which is awesome. It also goes all the way back, so it's great for putting on your desk. And on the back, there are those holes, which means you can stick something through it and pop out the eyeshadows. So if you've got a few of these palettes, you can actually mix and match, which is great. All right, let's swatch. The first shade is Stone, which is a matte. This is a nice sort of cool toned brown. It's got some sort of grey tones, but also some sort of rosy tones. Then there's Whisper, which is what looks like a light champagne. It's got a nice sort of light shimmer to it, but the base color is sort of like a pinky peach. Ella is more of a brown. So this looks like, yeah, a bronze, a darker bronze. It's quite pretty, but it's also quite standard. And for a cooler tone palette, it is one of the warmer shades. Vague is definitely more of a rosy toned matte. These do, I think on the finger anyway, need to be sort of picked up a little bit. So you can see it's definitely more warmer than the first shade. Travertine is another cool tone brown. This is a bit lighter and it's less sort of sparkly. It's more smooth than this one here, but it's just like a lighter, slightly more gold. Row number 2, we've got a bunch of different texture going on here. Delilah is very twinkly. So this sort of looks like a brown base with silver sparkle through it. So you can see it's definitely a different texture. I'll show this from different angles as well when I've swatched them all. But that has like little bits of glitter in it. It feels nice and smooth, not gritty, but you can see it's got almost like bluey silver tone glitter and more of a brown base. Then we've got Silhouette, which is a dark brown. That didn't pick up very well, but I think these pick up better on brushes than my finger, but you get the idea with the color. One more just to even it out. Muse is not my favorite texture. It's going to look very pretty, but it sort of feels quite chunky. And it's one of those shades that you'd be worried to like move your finger in it too much because it's going to lift up a lot, but the effect is gorgeous. Again, it's got almost like blue sparkle in it, but it's more of a sort of peachy base. So similar sort of sparkle, but different base colors. And this actually looks a little bit more twinkly, but very pretty. Next is the shade Fair, which is just like a fair shade. It's like my skin tone, so it's a matte. The next shade is Filigree. So this is another shimmery sort of cool tone brown. This is quite, it's like a metallic. So again, this doesn't have those sparkly shades. It's just, but it's very, very pigmented. Look how pigmented. Wit is a matte peachy shade. Probably the most peachy of the bunch. I would say it's definitely stands out as being quite warm, but it is, I would say it's quite neutral. But in this palette, it looks quite warm. I think it's an interesting combo. It will brighten up some of these sort of shades, so that will complement that one really nicely. Then we have Sheen, which looks gorgeous. This is sort of like, again, a sort of peachy base with a really, really fine champagne sparkle to it. So it's sort of similar to that concept, just a lot more subtle. That's a lot more bold. The next shade is Tender, which is like a stone sort of grey, darker than the first one in the palette, which was actually stone. They look very similar tones, so that sort of grey, rosy grey. This one's just a bit darker in colour. Last two shades, we have Mesh, which is another matte. I would say that even though this one, and that one are technically all different, they do just look like gradiating versions of each other. I think this could have been maybe more purple toned just to add a different vibe to the palette. I don't think they all need to be that sort of rosy, sort of grey colour. It's very pretty. I'd probably use this one a lot, but it is getting a bit repetitive. And then the last shade is Mia, which is a sort of very cool toned, sparkly shade. So this one almost has like a cool toned pink base. It's almost translucent, to be fair, but it does give a bit of a pink hue to the skin. And it's very twinkly. So it's mainly just like almost silver or very light sparkle. So there we go. Lots of sparkle, a lot of dimension. First quick comparison is to the ABH Sultry Palette. Hopefully you can see that they are very different. The top is the Sultry Palette, the bottom is the I Need a Nude. Something very obvious, the I Need a Nude is a lot more nude tone. So there's a lot more like rosy tones, a lot more taupey tones. The Sultry does have this sort of old gold shade, this metallic pink, a very vibrant coral, where this is the coral in the I Need a Nude. It's got similar sort of colored tones. It also goes a lot more gray. So there's like a true gray and like almost like a true gray silver and a black. So there's a lot more versatility in terms of shades in the top palette, but all the shades are this sort of metallic formula or matte. Whereas down here, there's different shades, like very, very sparkly shades, metallic shades, topper shades that have like almost translucent bases. So I would say that they're not the same. There is a little bit of overlap. So dark brown, sort of cream. There is some similarities, but it's definitely not a dupe palette. And do you need them both? That's up to you. And if you missed out on the top one and that looks like your perfect palette, well, my condolences. It is one of my favorite palettes and it has been discontinued for a long time. Next comparison is with the Kaleidos Venus Trap palette. So what I'm going to do is compare this sparkle shade to some of the new sort of sparkly topper formulas and also one of the greys, because this is a much cooler tone palette and I feel like Natasha Denona could have changed one of the sort of redundant mattes to something a lot more cool tone. So let's just swatch those. So this is the Kaleidos Quad. You can see it's very cool toned, more purple grey tones. And these are sort of similar colours in the Natasha Denona palette. So compared to this, these look quite warm. They look quite rosy. And you can see that this sparkle, even though it is sort of like a sparkle that doesn't have much base colour, similar to the shade Mia, this is a lot more refined and this is a lot more twinkly. So they are quite different. This is a much more bold palette or quad, and this is a lot more subtle and sort of more natural looking rather than quite cool toned. And just blend it out, Mia looking quite twinkly with a not much colour at the base, and the Kaleidos sparkly one, it's like silver glitter. It's very different. Last quick comparison is some of the shades from the Nearly Natural palette, which obviously has warm tones, green tones, more sort of blue silver tones, but it also has some cool tones and some really nice twinkly shades to some of the shades in here. So I'm just going to pull out a handful and just see how the formulas compare. This is the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette, by the way, one of my faves. The top is Glaminatrix and the bottom is Natasha Denona. I would say overall Glaminatrix is a little bit more bold. Some of these are very, very sort of sheer toppers, whereas Glaminatrix have a lot more sort of, they're very twinkly, like you can blend them out to be quite sheer, but they are a lot more pigmented, and the mattes seem to be more pigmented as well. And there's a lot more variety obviously in the palette, but that's how the sort of twinkly shades compare. This one is fairly similar. That's obviously a different tone, but there we go. All right, time to put these on my eyes. I'm actually going to use the Natasha Denona eyeshadow base for this, just because, let's see how it goes. All right, I think I'm going to go Delilah because I really kind of want to lean into see how cool toned I can get a look, and also see how twinkly I can get a look. So I'm just packing this on with just like a sort of packing brush. It's picking up quite nicely. It's transferring. This is the one of those shades that are like, oh, you know, if you want more impact, use your fingers. So I just want to see how it applies with the brush first. So this has a nice sort of grey base to it and a beautiful sort of bluey silver shimmer. So the people that love their cool tones would love that one. It's applying fine just directly onto normal primer. I'm not having any crazy fallout. It's picking up quite nicely. It's not looking super, like for apparently quite a sparkly shade, it's looking a little bit standard. So I'm going to actually pack that on with my finger and try to build up some of that glitter. It is very pretty. This would be a nice sort of smoky eye shimmer if you like a more sparkly smoky eye, but it's not like glitter fallout sparkle. It just looks like there's a, I don't know, like a silvery sheen throughout it. I sort of want to have something a little bit more. I'm going to go with Muse on my finger. This is one of those, there's that chunky shade, and this is supposed to be very, very shimmery. So I just want to pop that on the center just to ramp up that shimmer, because I want some shimmer, and that is it. So I do quite like topper shades that don't have too much base color, because you can put them over whatever you want. So if you want more oomph on this particular shade, you do it. Or if you want a matte all over the lid and just an oomph on a certain section, you can. So that is adding a lot more shimmer to it, which is very pretty, and there's a lot left on my finger. I'm picking up some mesh. So this is one of those lighter sort of grey rose shades. It is definitely a good blending out shade for me. This is a good sort of crease color, adds a bit of definition. It blends out the shimmer really nicely and blends into my skin tone very well. So I really like that. I'm just going to run that along my lower lash line as well. I feel like it's a little bit too light for my lower lash line, so it is quite a light shade. I'm going to go a bit deeper. On the same brush, I'm going to use the shade Tender, which is next to it. So that one is a lot darker, and I'm just going to use that in the outer corner just to deepen that a little bit, and that works a treat at just lightly sort of deepening that, and just a little bit to just add a little bit of a shadow to the lower lash line. I like these tones. I feel like they are definitely on the cooler side, but they're not as cool as like the Kaleidos Quad. But I prefer these on me personally. If I went in with something too grey underneath, I start looking like I've got sunken eyes. So yeah, these sort of more taupey tones is where I that's where I max out cool tones. On an angle brush, I just have the shade Silhouette, which is the dark brown. I'm just gonna see how that applies just as sort of like a subtle liner. There is some fallout because they are softer shades. You can tap off your brush. Just pressing that into the lash line. I'm not taking it all the way in. I just want to sort of add a little bit of lift to the eye. This applies quite nicely and builds up very easily. So that looks like a matte liner, which is nice. I'm going to keep this pretty simple today. I'm just going to finish it off with some mascara. I've got a Milk Makeup mascara here. This is just a sample. I do have to say I do have some fallout and some sort of glitter migrating. Like I've got glitter up here, glitter in there where I didn't even put any. But I suppose if you're going to get something really sparkly and twinkly, you know, put down something under your eye, like whether it's a tissue or something, or maybe use your wet brush if that's what you prefer, if you want it to really grip onto the skin. But there is definitely some migration and a little bit of fallout happening, but I personally don't mind too much. I feel like with the matte, I'll show you, you can sort of sweep it away. I really like this mascara. This mini, I've got a mini one, but this is the Milk Makeup Kush Mascara. It's a good one. It's a good one. It's very pretty. So with some of the matte fallout, you can just sort of dust it away. The glitter will stick a little bit, especially if your base isn't too set, but I think that's a very beautiful look and very simple to create. Is this the coolest look that I think you should be able to get from a fairly cool tone palette? No, I think you should go cooler. So I already can tell I've used this, I've used this, I've used that as liner and those two in the crease. And that's pretty much the coolest shades. Maybe, no, that one looked a little bit brown, didn't it? I don't think this is cool enough for a really cool tone palette. And knowing that they've got this shade, and that shade that look quite similar, just gradiating shades of each other, you could have turned that into a true grey. Like, turn that into a true grey. No one's going to be upset. So I think cool tone fanatics, this is not going to be enough for them by any means. But if you like neutral to cooler tone nudes, I think this is lovely. I'm going to keep wearing it. I love this look. I'm super happy I'm wearing it. I feel good. And that's what makeup is for. Easy to apply. No real dilemma besides a little bit of fallout, which is not that big a deal. And I'll be back with more looks. All right, this is look number 2. It's very simple. I've used 2 eyeshadows. There's no primer, so we can test. I'm not using primer because I wanted to do this makeup in literally like 2 minutes. But we can see if it creases throughout the day. So what I'm using on my eyes today is I went all over the lid with this shade on like a fluffy brush, like a pretty tapered fluffy brush. So that's that sort of like wet look sheen. And then I went with the peachy shade on the outer corner, blend it into the crease on the lower lash line, and then I put a little bit more of that in the inner corner. So on the lower lash line, it's sort of like used as a topper, whereas it's used as like the base eyeshadow. Everything's applying really nicely. It's obviously not really intense, but it's giving this really like, I haven't had a crap morning where my kid is still in pajamas at midday and tantrums and big feelings and baby didn't go. That's my morning. But I'm giving the illusion that that's not the case. I'm giving myself, I feel like I've got my shit together and maybe I'll hold out my patience for a bit longer. So there we go. You can see that that has a nice sort of wet look shine to it. Nothing over the top, nothing really sparkly, just sort of like brightening. All right, look number 3. We're going a bit more dramatic today. I'm going to a wedding. So I am of course wearing my palette because it's beautiful. On my eyes, I wanted to go something that was sort of twinkly and fun, but not too full on because I'm wearing quite a lot going on. So I started with I think I set my base with this shade, and then for the crease, I used this one. I built up to that one, just sort of in the outer corner, and then I blended out the lash line as well with the dark one. So there's a bit of sort of matte gradiating happening, which is also why I think this one's unnecessary, because I feel like once you've got those, this could be a different color completely. And then what I did, I wanted to go something sort of twinkly and fun, but not too sort of light. So I used this shade as a base color. It is pretty standard. It is like a cool toned brown, just not satin, but it's definitely not a metallic. It's definitely not a bold. It's quite subtle. And I was like, that's not twinkly enough. So I took this shade and I put it over the top. So yeah, I got the sort of twinkle and dimension. I got the color that I wanted as the base color, and then I built on it, which I do like that element of this. Like I do like that there are sort of topper shades that you can build on. So I didn't find this one too special, but again, if you're going to use this as an everyday palette and you don't want something to look bold and sparkly and, you know, on a daily basis, you know, it's probably good to have this, but this one is a little bit more fun, adds a little bit more dimension. So on the lower lash line, I've just got the mattes, but yeah, I'll zoom in. So the mattes do make a really nice sort of smoky, hazy, blended out, cool toned effect. You can definitely see there's a lot of light catching on the lid from that topper shade. I also wanted to mention that yesterday when I used the eyeshadows without the primer, I noticed that they stuck pretty well to the lid. They looked pretty good throughout the day. There wasn't like obvious creasing, but the shimmer was also quite a sort of sheer shimmer. So it wasn't like I've got blue eyeshadow and you can see the crease lines really obviously. It was a very subtle sort of shimmer. The mattes did fade off throughout the day though, not completely, but that sort of peachy sort of color that I had did dissipate throughout the day, which is, you know, to be understood. So yeah, if you want something that like the color intensity, this is not a really colorful palette, but if you want the color intensity to last throughout the day, definitely wear an eyeshadow primer. But I've got sort of like normal, slightly oily lids, and without a primer, the shimmers wore pretty well on me. This palette's going to get very repetitive. These looks are going to start looking the same. This could have been the first look. I just think it's the nature of the shades. I'm feeling like this could have been a lot more, they could have added in a lot more diversity, but just by changing a couple of shades. All right, day number 4, and I'm wearing today this shade in the crease. Now I feel like this palette's a bit deceptive. It's almost like the shades that look like they could be warmer. Actually, I don't know, does this look cooler? I feel like it looks more purpley than it looks in the pan, like more mauvey. I have layered this shade with it. So I sort of put this on first, put that in the outer corner in the crease, blended it, and then I put a little bit more of that on it. So it's they're sort of mixed a little bit on the lower lash line and the top lid, but I feel like it's making a nice sort of mauvey purple. This is definitely a cooler tone shade. It looks pink in the pan, but it's got like a silvery sort of white sort of sheen to it. So it's quite frosty. So, but I don't know, like it does look the same. I feel like the shades that sort of look cool end up looking warmer, and the shades that look sort of potentially warm, on me anyway, are looking quite cool. But anyway, I quite like this look. Nothing special about it. There's nothing special about it. I think this crease color that I used is slightly more unique. It's that sort of rosy, sort of mauvey tone, which I think is really pretty. I did use this shade here as a bit of a wing. So just on like a flat sort of brush, I just made a little bit of a wing just to add a little bit of dimension to the eye, a little bit of shape. But yeah, so far, all pretty looks. Nothing phenomenal, but nothing bad. All right, this is a look close up, so you can see that it gives this sort of like wet look sort of sheen, but it's not super twinkly. It's not super special. It's just, you know, a nice sort of iridescence to the eye that can be layered. All right, today's look is super basic. This is also why I like this palette. Like, you want something that's super basic. Oh, an update from my last look. I want to mention that these sort of twinkly shades, so I think I had Mia on the lid, they do look a little bit bland in like direct sunlight, but in artificial light, they look a lot more twinkly. So I will have, like, I find that whenever I go to take my makeup off in the evening and I've got the bathroom lights on, I'm like, oh, it's so beautiful, because they do catch the light really nicely. But I feel like they look a little bit more twinkly in artificial light. So that's just one thing to note. Today I'm just using these two. So this one is just like a shimmer satiny sort of finish, so it's not twinkly. And this shade, even though it looks similar to that, I feel like on the eye, it looks a lot more cool toned. Like, this is the one I'm wearing today, so that top one. They are a little bit redundant still, but you can see there is a difference. So the shimmer's all over the lid, but you can see it's just like a satin. And then I've got that matte in the crease and on the lower lash line in the outer corner. All right, I'm back with my last look, and this is a fairly basic one, but I wanted to use some shades that I needed to sort of play with, obviously. I think I've used all the shades now. Now what I did today, I'll actually insert some footage. I used the shade Muse just by itself on eyeshadow primer. I applied it with my finger, then I blended it out with a brush just on the lid because I really wanted to see how this new sort of twinkly formula looks on its own. I've previously used it sort of layered on top of other shades, but I want to see how twinkly it is on its own. Now, it did create a very pretty look. That is definitely something I would wear just as a one and done eyeshadow on a daily basis. I love a sort of nude subtle sparkle. I feel like it's brightening and fun, and pairing it with like a red lip, I just really like it. So I liked how it looked. I do think it looks more twinkly and special under artificial light. There will be a clip on the screen of me. I closed the blinds and used my torch on my phone. You can see it does look like a different sort of sparkly element when it's in different lighting. I feel like in natural everyday lighting, it's not as twinkly as it could be, but it's a very pretty shimmer. All I've done today is just added to it a little bit by using the shade Filigree here, which is like a dark, cool toned shimmery brown. And I used that in the outer corner. You can see it added like a layer of smokiness to the look. Put that on the lower lash line, and then I blended it out with Stone. So very, very quick. Again, this eye look took a couple of minutes max. So very simple, and I think I've used all shades in this palette. So nothing super exciting. I do like how that added like a cool toned smoky brown effect. I think it does show that this can be amped up a little bit more, made a little bit more dramatic, but it also blends really nicely with the other shimmer. So they don't clash. All the shades apply really nicely. And also I did apply this sort of with a packing brush and then blended it out. And I feel like I didn't even need to really go in the crease with the matte. I feel like the shimmer on its own, it doesn't sort of emphasize lines and textures too much. So you could actually just blend a shimmer in the crease and have a all shimmer look, no problem. And I think it's twinkly and pretty. All right, conclusion time. What do I think about this palette that has been super hyped, and this review is very late, so sorry, but I'm gonna say, how do I say this? It's more boring than I feel like Natasha Denona is making out. That's not necessarily a bad thing, so I'll try to unpack that. But there are new shimmer formulas in here, like I mentioned. So I'm just looking at the shade description on the website. So Ella, this one here, is the sparkling foiled effect. Delilah is sparkling wet. Muse is sparkling foiled. Filigree is sparkling foiled, which I don't think it's that sparkling. Like, I'm wearing it today and it sort of performed just as a standard, quite a high shine shimmer, but not sparkling. And Mia is a sparkling wet effect. So they've added in these, what's supposed to be quite sparkly, quite impactful. And all I see that as being is one level up from a standard shimmer. I don't think that, compared to my collection of what I've got, I don't feel like these stand out as being like, I'm blown away by the new finishes. Are they pretty? Yes. Do they perform well? Yes. But I personally think the palettes that I even compared this to earlier in the video, so Glaminatrix Nearly Natural, the Kaleidos Quad with that really sparkly, sort of chunkier glitter, those are a lot more twinkly and more impactful and more, if you want sparkly finish, I feel like they're more wow. So for me, this was just like, oh yeah, it's nice, but the sort of expectation for this new formula, I feel like it wasn't as interesting as they make out. So there's that. Otherwise, I think the formula is very nice. The mattes blended really nicely. I had no issues throughout the whole week and a bit of using this. There was a little bit of fallout, sparkle fallout occasionally, but like not that big a deal and something you can sort of dust away. So I found the formula and how these applied really easy, and I really liked them. I generally do like how Natasha Denona formulas apply and wear. They must work really well on me, and they must work well with the techniques that I use to apply my eyeshadow, because I've never had real issues with their formula, which is why I'm sort of confident in spending 114 Australian dollars on this. So yeah, how it applies, great. I love it for quick, easy makeup because you can literally throw it on. It's not going to ruin your base. It's not going to skip and apply funny and then you have to take off your makeup and redo it. Like it is, for me, it's quite a reliable formula and quite a flattering formula. I even find that certain areas where I might have textures or fine lines, these tend to sit really nicely. Even the shimmery shades, they just look really nice. So I like Natasha Denona formula in general. So this was no different. I do like that there are different textures going on here, but again, I don't think they were so vastly different from a normal shimmer formula that I'm like, oh my god, you have to have this palette for those sparkly shades. They're just a level up from being a shimmer. So yeah, if you were the type of person that wanted to buy this because you wanted to try the shimmers and you thought they were going to be really amazing looking and really different and really elevated from other palettes, I wouldn't recommend this palette for that. What I would recommend this palette for is the people who see it as being boring but very wearable. Essentially, in my opinion, this fills a void in her range, where the Bieber palette, really orange, very warm, very matte heavy. So if you like shimmer, that palette was not good for you. And also the cool tones in there were grays and black. So pretty much the cooler tone nudes you don't get in that palette. Bronze is essentially, in my opinion, I've got it, it's essentially an orange palette with a bit of brown and lots of gold. And then the Glam palette, it does have some cooler sort of pinky shades, but predominantly it's like soft golds and warm browns, and again, quite a warm tone nude palette. So this fills a void that if you're after a Natasha Denona palette and you like the quality and you want the sort of 15 pan, midi pan format, but you want something that's sort of everyday wearable, but leaning towards the cooler side, this is what you get. And this is why I was excited for this, but it doesn't mean it's a particularly interesting palette. But I like that it's boring. It means I can reach for it. I can apply makeup in a couple of minutes. I know it's going to look flattering. I know it's going to suit me. I know it's going to be probably quite standard looking and the shades start looking quite repetitive, but it's quite reliable and quite flattering. So I feel like if you look at this and go, I can wear that every day and I want to wear that to work, I want to wear that to seeing friends, I want to wear that to go to the movies, that's the kind of person I'd recommend this palette to. Yes, you can take it sort of subtle, matte, almost satiny looks through to more twinkly, elevated looks a little bit, but in reality, it's all sort of very everyday wearable shades. So this sort of neutral to cooler toned color story really suits me. A lot of it is quite mid-toned or light, so it is probably better for people with lighter to medium skin. If you do have deeper skin, you can still use this because maybe besides this fair shade here, but one thing I do like that Natasha Denona did was she didn't make the shimmers too frosty. So they are light shimmers and they do reflect a light color, but they don't have a frosty base. So they're not like blanked out, almost like making your eyelids look white or chalky. They're actually translucent. So again, you can get that twinkly effect layered on top of something a bit deeper. So if you do have deep skin and you're like, this color story speaks to me, you can actually make it work. There might be a couple of shades that you don't love and don't use too often, but the majority of it will work for you because the way they formulated the shimmers, they're mainly toppers. What I think is a little bit disappointing about this palette personally is that it is very one note. I feel like with 15 slots, there is some repetitive shades going on. This is lighter and more cool tone than that one, but it's so similar. And then there's some browns that are sort of, yes, they are different, but if you blended them out on the eye, they sort of look similar. Again, even though I do like that these are more topper, sort of translucent shades, they can give a very similar effect on the eye. So there is a lot of repetitiveness going on here. And I think at the end of the day, if you like the looks that I've been creating and you like the color story, you're going to love this palette. But if you look at the looks that I've created and gone, they all look the same, you're not wrong. They do all look the same because even though I'm using different shades, they effectively look the same on the eye. I feel like they could have really taken some of the repetitive shades out and put in shades that complement and are just a little bit different. So have this one a little bit more gray. Have it maybe a little bit more mauve toned. Let's lean into some more purpley shades, like not true purple, obviously, because this is a nude palette, but like this shade could have been sort of taupey purple shade, still looking quite nude and wearable on the eye, but just adding a different sort of flavor to the palette. So I feel like there was too much of the same thing going on. If I had to summarize this palette, I would say it's cool toned mattes, it's cooler toned shimmery bronzers, and sparkly toppers. That's all it is. And I feel like there was room to make this a little bit more interesting and a little bit more, not day to night, but a little bit more diverse in the looks that you can create from this. As it is, it's very, very same, with slight tweaks like, oh, that crease color is slightly lighter than that other one, or this one is slightly more pink toned than that one, or whatever it happens to be. I also think, and you know, people are going to fall off their chair, I also feel like this sort of color story could have benefited from something like a black, like a matte black. So to make it a little bit more smoky and again, a little bit more versatile, I just feel like this was very one note, and having 15 pans of the same note is a little bit like, it's very redundant for one, but it's also a little bit boring. And even for me who loves the effect of this palette, I felt like it was sort of Groundhog Day trying to use all the different shades. I'm like, it's creating the same look. So am I screaming the praises from the rooftops? No, I'm not. I feel like this is a very practical palette. It's one that if I don't know what I want to wear, I can reach for it and create a flattering look that I know suits me. This is pretty one note, and I like the note, but it's a boring note. I just don't think it's groundbreaking enough to tell everyone, look, you need this in your life. You don't, but you will know if you do. And that's the thing. If you have been missing this sort of color story in this formulation, you'll appreciate it, you'll use it, and it will look flattering and it'll be easy to use. And that's, you know, great in itself, but it is boring. Let's be real. It's a boring palette. So that's my review. Let me know if you've tried this palette, what you think about it, because it's getting, like, from what I can see on like websites, it's getting like 5-star reviews. A lot of people are really loving it. But again, I think that's the practicality of it coming through and the fact that this was a gap in her range rather than it being like an outstanding, super exciting, revolutionary palette. It's not, but it's nice. I want to thank my channel members for supporting my channel. Mwah! You're all beautiful and your names will be on the screen. I appreciate you. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye.